If you're not law enforcement, go! If you're not law enforcement, go!
I think they got him.
I do too, but we haven't confirmed it.
Hey everybody, I'm Jesse Weber filling in for Chris tonight. Good to be with all of you. So that was very dramatic body cam footage just released by Pennsylvania police of the desperate final moments to stop the shooter before the assassination attempt of former President Donald Trump. We are going to show you a lot more of that footage in just a moment, and it tells us a lot. Plus, speaking of Donald Trump, just held a very interesting press conference at Mar-a-Lago. I think that's a fair word to use, because he made some very wild claims, and he made some news about his possible debate with Kamala Harris. Now, you may think, oh, that's just Donald Trump, but is there a strategy here? We're going to get to that. Then we have disturbing details of this ISIS-linked terrorist plot of a Taylor Swift concert. The suspects wanted to kill as many people as possible, and they wanted to make it an inside job. Here's a question for you. Should you feel safe sending your kids to a concert? We're going to talk the risks. We're going to talk reality with a former CIA and FBI agent, and also somebody who specializes in security at major events. Also, new update on a story that we've been tracking since the beginning. Could the estranged husband of missing Florida resident Anna Knezevich, who is charged with her kidnapping, go free from jail? You might be saying, what are you talking about? Well, David Knezevich was in court today after an FBI agent changed her story on some very key details. So could it be enough to set David free? We will bring you the latest. But let's start with some politics, of course, very big political week. So Donald Trump, he ramped up the war of words with Kamala Harris in a very wild press conference at Mar-a-Lago. It's his first presser, by the way, since Harris became the presumptive Democratic nominee. And the former president took questions to focus more attention on the fact that Harris hasn't done an interview or press conference since she replaced Joe Biden at the top of the Democratic ticket. Here are some highlights.
She's not smart enough to do a news conference. She hasn't done an interview. She can't do an interview. She's barely competent. If you look at Martin Luther King, when he did his speech, his great speech, and you look at ours, same real estate, same everything, same number of people, if not, we had more. When you compare them to other things that took place in this country where a lot of people were killed, nobody was killed on January 6th. But I think that the people of January 6th were treated very unfairly. I think that abortion has become much less of an issue. It's a very I think it's actually going to be a very small issue.
Think we have a lot of things to digest from that? Oh, yes, we do. Now, he also made some news because he said he agreed to three debates with Harris in September, starting with Fox News on September 4th. Harris, though, hasn't agreed, wants Trump to stick to the one debate that he agreed to on ABC September 10th. Here's the question. Did Donald Trump help or hurt his campaign today? Well, here to answer that question, I'm going to ask two people who you know will not agree on this. NewsNation political contributor and former White House press secretary under Donald Trump, Sean Spicer, and NewsNation contributor and former Chuck Schumer staffer, Chris Hahn. Great to have you both here. Sean, I'm going to start with you. Look, I can say what everybody on the left-leaning media has said, right? Undisciplined. This is crazy. How could he talk about that? I think it's a little bit more nuanced than this. I don't believe that Donald Trump does anything without some sort of purpose, some sort of strategy. And whatever you want to call him, he's not a dumb guy. I am struggling a little bit to find the strategy of holding this press conference and some of the things he said, so I throw it to you.
Well, I think he wanted to reclaim the narrative. For the last 14 plus days, we've been talking about Kamala Harris, her running mate, her campaign. Today, all eyes were focused on Donald Trump. He wanted to reclaim the media narrative, and he got it. He's talked about the debates right out of the gate. I mean, look, for Donald Trump, a lot of people were concerned that he'd go after her on a very personal level, that he'd attack Tim Walz. He stayed pretty true to issues for Donald Trump. He reclaimed the narrative. He talked about the debates. The ball falls back in her court now. Now the question, as you pointed out, is people are asking, will you accept the other debates? She asked whether or not he was scared to debate her. That's fully over. This is a guy who just took a bullet, and she's trying to claim that he was scared to debate her for a debate that he agreed to with Joe Biden. The question is she going to now agree to the other ones that he proposed? The other networks have accepted those. We have a traditional three-debate schedule. So the ball is in her court, and that's what the goal was today. The goal was to reclaim the narrative.
I can agree with that. And Chris, I see you chomping at the bit. I'm going to get to you in 1 second. I just want to ask you one thing about that, Sean. Reclaim the narrative. And I made this same criticism during the RNC speech. The world was watching Donald Trump, and he went on a 90-minute what some could say was a rant. I thought it was a squandered opportunity. Why during today did he have to say that he gets 10 to 30 times the crowd size than Kamala Harris? That means getting 150,000 to 450,000 people at his rallies, which isn't true. Why even say that? That's not the narrative he wants.
Yeah, I don't think that the news coming out today was crowd sizes, and I know a little bit about that subject, so I'm going to be careful how I tread on it. That being said, I appreciate Chris giving
Chris
Chris the chuckle.
Memories for him.
Okay, so Chris,
exactly.
So fair.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay. You know what?
Little
you get
bit
my
of
point.
Bipartisanship.
You
get
my point. You get my point. Chris, I'll throw it to you.
I do, but you know what? If that's, with all due respect, I mean, and I appreciate Chris adding some bipartisanship to this, but if that's the one criticism or the big thing today, then that's a win for Donald Trump.
I don't know if that's the one. We'll get into it. But Chris, I'm going to throw it now to you because the other way of looking at this is, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond to what you thought happened today, but the counter argument is, hey, think about what you want about what he said today. At least he took a press conference. Kamala Harris hasn't done it in 2 weeks.
Yeah, and I guess it caused her to take a couple of questions outside the plane, and it'll probably cause her to take a few more questions. But I got to seize on one thing Sean said. For Donald Trump, I think that the American people are about to stop grading him on a curve, right? He was wild. He was weird. But like Sean said, wasn't as bad as he normally is. He just called a woman stupid for no reason, bragged about his crowd size, compared himself to Martin Luther King, a guy who thinks he's going to win more African-American votes. Comparing himself to Martin Luther King, probably not the best thing for him to do, right?
Okay.
So I think the question we have to all ask ourselves right now, when will the media and when will the American people stop grading this guy on a curve? I think he was a failure as a president.
And Sean,
I keep 2020 in my mind.
Sean, I'll go to you 1 second. I just want to press Chris on this for a second. See, here's the problem. I could hear you with that. But if this is a game of optics and it matters what Kamala Harris says right now, wouldn't you agree that there is an issue about her off the cuff? Her on prompter, fantastic. But her off the cuff, and there is a concern about doing a press conference. There is a concern about doing an interview. There is maybe concern about her doing a debate with Donald Trump in an unprepared territory, in an uncharted territory in a way. That's the question I ask. Because look what happened. Very different scenario, but President Joe Biden had a lot of issues with how he was speaking in that debate. I think the thing for Harris is to prove she can answer these questions. Chris, throw it back to you.
Look, Jesse, before Sean and I were talking heads that America adored, we used to be in battle doing campaigns and preparing candidates, and we will both agree that there's always risk when a candidate talks unscripted, particularly with a motivated press corps. So there's always going to be a risk there. But I will say this, Donald Trump and the rest of Republicans focusing on this are, again, lowering the bar for Kamala Harris, and that will help her when they actually do debate in September. Because they're saying she's not intelligent. She doesn't have depth on the issues. She can't speak in complete sentences. They did the same thing with Biden. They happened to be right that time. But I don't think they're as right. I don't think they're right at all when it comes to Vice President.
I'm going to throw it over to Sean. What do you think about his ability to debate Kamala Harris? Look, I think there's more of an advantage for her to do it. But remember, although that's his strength, and it clearly helped him win in 2016, he's not debating Hillary Clinton. He's debating Kamala Harris. There is a difference there,
That's right.
Sean.
No, I agree. And look, I will say this. She is a very apt prosecutor. She probably is a much better debater than either Hillary was or Joe Biden was. I do get a kick out of the fact that the same people who pushed Biden out there and said we got to move up this debate are now pushing her to debate him on ABC. This may be something they come to regret. But at the end of the day, aside from reclaiming the narrative on the debate, he stood there for 62 minutes and took 37 questions. That was also part of the light that he cast her in today and said, hey, why don't you get out there and do something? You may not like some of Donald Trump's answers, but at least he's willing to. He goes to the National Association of Black Journalists. He went and debated Biden on ABC on Joe Biden's terms. He took a bullet. This guy's tough, and I wouldn't underestimate him. Yeah,
Sean, it's a tired act. It's a tired act. It's the same old act that he's been doing for the last 8 years. The American people are tired of it. He has no new material. So. He's talking about the crowd size from 8 years.
You know what,
guys? I mean, it's time for him to move on and talk about what's important to the voters who matter.
Chris, Sean, I think I have something that you might both agree on. Believe it or not, would you both agree that a lot rides on this debate, that it could be make or break for Donald Trump? come September on that debate? Am I getting you both to agree? The nod, yes?
No, and look, I will say this. I said this before the Biden debate. Mine is something cataclysmic. I mean, debates aren't going to move the needle in this country right now. I think, look, if someone falls off stage or says something, but go back and look at the history of debates. They don't really move the needle that much unless it's a cataclysmic failure a la Biden the other day. So I don't put that much stock in it unless she says something or he says something. And look, he said and done everything so far. I don't think the American people are going to be that concerned about something that comes out of his mouth. She's got a lot more to lose than he does right now.
Yeah.
I tend to agree that debates don't move the needle that much. But I will tell you this. The more the American people see Donald Trump, see his same old tired act, the more they realize that they don't want to go back to that nonsense. They don't want to go back to the chaos that was the Trump presidency. They want to move on. They don't want to think about the president.
Here's my question.
The best thing I could say about Joe Biden's presidency is that it was boring. I wasn't thinking about him all the time.
Okay, so Chris, that leads me exactly to where I want to go. I will tell you the amount of energy we have seen in the last 2 weeks has been incredible for the Democratic Party. This is what they need. They needed a jolt of energy. They got it. This is the honeymoon phase.
Yep.
How do they maintain momentum? Because we might be in August. November's a long way away. We got debates coming up. Things change. There's already 1 day after Tim Walz was announced as the running mate. There are things about his military record. How do the Democrats maintain momentum?
Well, it starts with a great convention in about 10 days from now, right? So they got to do that. They got to work that up. They got to keep their base motivated. She's done an amazing job consolidating the Democratic Party base. And I will tell you this, I do not belong to an organized party. I'm a Democrat. It takes a lot of work and a lot of effort to do it. She did it overnight. So it's amazing. I haven't seen this kind of energy since Obama. And it's the kind of energy that is of a party coming back to life that thought it was dead. And I think that's a very good energy that she could carry into November.
Okay, now, Sean, here's the criticism I have of the right, in the sense that I want specifics. I would love a debate where we actually talk policy and not personal attacks. And maybe one of the things that's happening here, maybe you could argue we saw today with Donald Trump, is there a distraction from what his real policy issues are and maybe weaknesses in those policies? And it's focusing on the things about crowd size and focusing on Kamala Harris or Tim Walz. Because what are the exact policies? And do you think it's been properly articulated by J.D. Vance and Donald Trump?
I respectfully disagree. I mean, I took pages of notes today on the 37 different questions that he was asked. He talked about Social Security and the economics. He talked about Elon Musk. I mean, I'm going down through the issue. He actually talked about abortion and guns and Israel.
Anything.
So he got into it. The question, I mean, with all due respect, and this isn't a NewsNation problem, but when it comes to NBC and ABC, is it more about the moderators or is it more about the issues? They have tried to make these debates more about them and their moderators and not about the issues.
I don't know, but wait, I don't know, Sean. I think the last debate.
I don't think that was
I don't think the last debate. I'm trying to struggle who was even debating it because they were barely even doing it.
And Dana
yeah,
Bash.
right. They were barely a part of it. They were barely a part of it. It was mostly about Biden and Trump.
Right. And my point is that if we can stick to the issues, then you can get to it. But you can see that there is a model for it. Trump spent a lot of today talking about that. I would take one issue with this. Look, I will agree with Chris. After Joe Biden got pushed out, you could get excited about a doorknob. I don't think it took much to get excited. But as you've just mentioned, this rollout of Tim Walz, who was supposed to be a do-no-harm candidate, has been disastrous. There are questions about his policy. Kamala Harris doubled down on the far extreme left. His military service is being called into question on the stolen valor issues.
Let me throw this to Chris before we go.
Here's the bottom line.
Yeah.
Hold on. The bottom line is this. From now until the convention, and then beyond that, the question is, how many times does the narrative shift? Does one side do this? And that's why Kamala Harris refuses to answer questions, because they get it. They don't want it. When they were asked today, she said, in a few weeks, we'll do a joint interview.
So, Chris, I go back to you. Are you concerned about Kamala Harris being a free flow, taking questions? As I've said, there's been documented cases where that has not been her strength.
No, I'm not at all concerned. And I just want people like my friend Sean here to keep lowering the bar for her. Okay. And I think the Republicans will do that. They'll lower the bar. And I think, wait a couple weeks. Let them lower the bar a little more.
Well, I tell you what, I thought this was a good debate. And I almost got you guys to agree. I almost got you guys to agree. I thought I was going to get you guys to agree, but it's okay. Sean Spicer, Chris Hahn, thank you both so much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jesse.
Bye, Jesse.
All right, now to the other major news involving the former president. There is this dramatic body cam footage from the final moments just before the assassination attempt of Donald Trump, attempted assassination attempt of Donald Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania. And the footage was released today by Pennsylvania police, and it shows the police officer, you're going to see it right here, who confronted Crooks, the suspected shooter, mere moments before he shot Trump. Now, the first part is muted. I'm walking you through this, but you see the officer, he signals to his fellow officer to help him lift him up, and right there, right here, you're going to see it, he drops back down. This is on the AGR building, drops down off the roof because Crooks points the weapon at him, or it's kind of quick, but you can kind of see that, and the officer falls 12 feet, actually sprains his ankle, and moments later, Crooks fires on Trump and others at the rally. The officer, as you can see, runs around the building, appearing to shout at people to evacuate the area. He grabs a rifle from his car, and now this is where the audio kicks in, and we're going to hear what happened the moments after Crooks was killed. Let's take a look.
This close, bro. Dude, he turned around on me. He's straight up. Yo, Blasco. Yo, you about to hop up. He's laying down. He's going north. Next building over. Right after the gap. He's got glasses, long hair. Yo, Mike. Climb the wall. And I pop my head right in front of him, bro. He's got a book bag. He's got mag AR laying down. 1, 2, 3. Yo. Before you came up here, I popped my head up there like an idiot by myself, dude. He turned around, I dropped, and I started.
That's how they got somebody up there. I thought somebody was up there. I put my head up here. If he was up there, I've been toast.
Dude, that's what I was calling out, bro. On top of the roof, are we on the same frequency?
Yeah, so much for a picture with Trump.
All right, let's bring in former Secret Service agent who served on details of 3 presidents, including Donald Trump, Paul Eklof. Paul, thanks so much for coming on. I want your reaction to what you saw here, and also, okay, so I think we're having trouble getting Paul. Maybe we can get him later on in the show. Look, my perspective on it, I've been following this since the beginning. This actually mirrors a lot of what we've seen, very different seeing it in person. All right, so the break is 4 minutes, 5 seconds. Coming up, we have a lot more talk about this, horrifying new details on the terror plot targeting a Taylor Swift concert. Should we think twice about sending our kids to concerts? We're going to separate fact from fiction, and how are terror groups targeting and radicalizing young men online? That's next. We showed you this very dramatic body cam footage from the final moments just before the assassination attempt of Donald Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania. Mirrors kind of what we heard before, an officer being lifted up. The suspected shooter points a rifle at him, and he drops. Really incredible stuff. I want to bring in former Secret Service agent who served on 3 details of 3 presidents, including Donald Trump, Paul Eklof. Now we got Paul with us. Paul, good to see you. Thanks so much for coming on. Okay, so first, what's your reaction to this footage? And I think the more important question is, what piece of the puzzle does this fit in?
This video is harrowing and it's fascinating, honestly. If you watch in real time this body cam footage of these officers scaling the roof to confront a potential assassin. This is historical in that we have a potential an attempted assassination of a former president that the public and law enforcement is able to dissect. Now, this story was told before, but now having it corroborated, I would like to see some sound from it if they're able to recover that, because what we saw was tactical communication between the officers and each other. But I'd like to know what went out on the radio, because they were able to disrupt, I believe, this assassination attempt. But what more could have been done?
It's interesting you say that. So first of all, the beginning part of this video, there's no audio. The body cam audio isn't turned on. Then it turns on. There is a point when this officer says, basically, I'm summarizing, that we're not on the same frequency. And that part is so interesting because there was another bit of audio that was released today where you hear local law enforcement, this is 10 minutes after the shooting, in a way criticizing Secret Service for not securing that building, the AGR building, where the shooter was on. I want to play that real quick.
I told them they need to post the guys over here. I told them that the Secret Service. I told them that Tuesday. I told them to post guys over here.
I'd say this is up.
Sorry, not sure which gas company.
Somebody up.
Paul, you know this has been the blame game. Everybody's pointing the fingers. What do you make of that?
Well, I make it that they're pointing out the obvious, and we've seen a lot of arguing online and on the news about who's at fault. Clearly, the Secret Service is at fault. But what we're seeing, though, is the success of the partnership system. The local officers pointed out an obvious vulnerability, and the Secret Service partners with them because of their local knowledge. Somebody assumed that it was covered when it was not, and that is a failure that all of the investigations are going to get to the bottom of. The lack of radio communications, or at least co-locating a Butler County radio. I believe there was a state police radio co-located with the Secret Service, but clearly not these officers. So they're right to criticize, and we are seeing blame go back and forth. But I want to point out that we can be critical of the advance and the clear failures, but we need to also be able to recognize the clear heroism of those officers who, by any means necessary, scaled that roof and came face to face with a potential presidential assassin.
And he did it again. Later on in the video, he actually scaled it again with a rifle in hand. He was directing people to run from the area. It's the same kind of heroism we saw from the actual Secret Service agents who swarmed on Donald Trump that day. I am curious, though, the action. Again, we've heard about this before in reports. We heard testimony about it on Capitol Hill about an officer being lifted up. To actually watch it go down and see what was essentially this close to his life being taken, potentially, right? Is that standard to operate that way, to be lifted up, confront the threat? There was no way he could grab a weapon. That's very clear. What did you make of the way he actually got on the roof?
It's interesting because what I think this shows is that the brave men and women of law enforcement will do anything necessary to protect their communities. This is something those that have done it for decades are aware of, but the general public is not aware of. There was no ladder. There was expediency needed, and they had to get on that roof, and they made do with what they had. Now, in this case, he put his own self in the line of fire and disrupted this assassin. Now, there were other opportunities to disrupt. Disruption is a key part in any security plan. It could have been interviewed earlier when he was testing the perimeter near the magnetometers. It could have been disrupted if an officer or an agent had spoken to him when he was on that park bench that we heard about, when he flew his drone. In this case, it was very late in the assassination attempt, and I believe it was the actions of these officers that spurred him to speed up his plan and start shooting before he was prepared to do so.
And you know what else? This video actually corroborates what we've heard before. So when we hear conspiracy theories and false information, this is actually now corroborating what we've heard before, and that is a great thing to avoid any kind of misinformation about what's going on. Paul Eckloff, thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, so now we're going to shift from one domestic plot to one overseas, because we have new information tonight in the alleged ISIS-inspired plot to target a Taylor Swift concert in Europe. Yeah, the plan was to create a mass casualty event. The main suspect, a 19-year-old man who authorities say pledged his allegiance to ISIS and confessed to the plot after investigators found bomb-making chemicals, detonators, knives, machetes, all at his home. He was looking to kill himself and as many people as possible. Now, Austrian officials now have 3 male teens in custody. I want you to hear these ages, 19, 17, 15 years old, who say they were radicalized online. And that is really scary to think about. And it seems that this group may have wanted to make this an inside job, because the 17-year-old worked for a company that was set to provide stadium security at Taylor Swift's Vienna shows. The teens are described as Austrian-born, but they're of Turkish, Macedonian, and Croatian descent. And while this plot thankfully was caught in time, we know there were other concert venues in Europe that haven't been so lucky: Paris, Manchester, England, Moscow. But none was as big of a venue as the stadium hosting Taylor Swift. So here's a question. How concerned should you be about going or sending your kids to a large concert? I want to bring in Ben Jolson. He runs security, risk, and resilience at the Chertoff Group, where he actively works with stadiums and security for large events just like this one. And we're also joined by NewsNation contributor Tracy Walder. She's a former CIA and FBI agent. Good to have you both here. Ben, I'll start with you. I imagine there are a lot of vulnerabilities with such a large venue. Should people be concerned after this, or is this more of kind of an isolated incident?
I mean, I think the first point, and thank you for having me tonight, I think the first point is this is an example of the system working in the sense that there was collaboration between intelligence officials. There was an earlier duty to warn notification that went out, and Austrian officials responded swiftly. Their COBRA team, which is the equivalent of the FBI's hostage rescue team, made the arrests. So I think there are inherent vulnerabilities that we can talk about, but the kind of opening point is that this is an averted tragedy thanks to the collaboration that we have with international partners from a law enforcement and intelligence perspective.
But just to follow up on that, it was great work, and I've seen so many terror plots ultimately foiled. Is there a concern about people going to large-scale events if they're able to almost be committed by teenagers?
I think it does highlight the fact that the terrorism risk is extremely elevated right now. And if you add to that the fact that we have the Paris Olympics ongoing, which can be a potential distraction or a focus area for law enforcement, it is an opportunity for terrorist groups, radicalized individuals, to pursue a mass casualty attack. And I would also point out that one point that event security planners are always looking at is how to push the perimeter further out and how to get people inside so you avoid the crowds and the queuing, which frankly for a 65,000 person event is somewhat inevitable. So my guess is that was partially motivating for the decision to postpone the event.
And Tracy, let's talk about these three individuals, because there's so many reports now about young men, particularly in Europe, who are being radicalized online. I mean, why is this happening? How does it happen?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Jesse. Look, this has actually been happening for quite some time, really since the inception of ISIS. ISIS's target in terms of recruitment has always been younger males, particularly the 14 to 25-year-old age set. And that's exactly who they went after here. They used to use X actually predominantly in recruiting. Believe it or not, they had accounts, and that's how they were reaching out to people. And now we know they're using things like YouTube and other ways to recruit individuals. But ISIS has always been better, quite frankly, than Al-Qaeda at recruiting these sort of lone wolf, younger male terrorists.
And is there any way to source where this is coming from to stop it? Or is it just too hard to find? You might be able to see the communications, but you don't know where it's coming from exactly.
So that's the hard part here, right? Is because obviously the World Wide Web is enormous, and that's what makes it incredibly difficult. That's why having really good relationships with our foreign intelligence partners are so important. I said last night that I thought this may have been stopped because the U.S. passed information that they had. My guess was correct in that the U.S. actually did pass Austria this information. My guess is they were targeting the person on the other end of those recruiting methods and the recruiting calls. They were targeting those folks. They then tipped off the Austrians that there were individuals that were being actively recruited.
You know, Ben, one of the things is I wonder how they were able to get these supplies. How easy is it to get the supplies? Because there's a part of me that says you want to recruit young, impressionable men. Okay. But you're also dealing with a level of inexperience. They don't have the same kind of resources as maybe an adult terrorist would have. But the fact that they had these materials, or at least one of them had the materials, how concerning is that? How easy is it for them to gain access to this?
Yeah, I think, Jesse, it's a great question. I mean, I think one of the things that investigators will be looking at is just the volume of material that they had. It's one thing to have small amounts of a precursor chemical like hydrogen peroxide. It's quite another to have, 500 or 2,500 pounds of explosive to actually have a vehicle-borne improvised explosive device. I mean, I think from what we're seeing, and I would highlight this is very preliminary, obviously the investigation's ongoing, but from what we're seeing, these are, pretty unsophisticated tools, a machete, some chemicals, potentially some detonators and wiring, but we're not seeing a large complex footprint, or we haven't heard of a large operation that denotes maybe a much larger vehicle-borne IED threat or something of that magnitude. And that does, to your point, speak to kind of the suspects and the subjects here. I mean, if they're thinking they can basically, if you remember the West Side Highway attack in 2017 in the United States, and the Berlin Christmas attack, those were just trucks that were driven into crowds and caused, dozens of casualties. So unfortunately, these attacks are as creative as the individuals that are carrying them out, and they can do so with pretty simple equipment.
Yeah, it doesn't take much to create so much damage. I'm going to ask both of you a question real quick. Trace, I'll start with you. Given everything we've talked about and seen, would you send your child to a Taylor Swift concert right now in Europe?
I'm going to be very honest with you. I took my child to a Taylor Swift concert. So yes, I would. The reality is if we don't, terrorists win. And just to your point on how easy it is to get these chemicals, the CIA sent me to poison school because that's what I worked when I was there. They sent us to Home Depot with $50, and it was very easy to acquire this. So it's not at all surprising. But if we stop living, then the terrorists win.
It's really well said. Ben, I'll give you the final word on that too.
I agree. I mean, I think this is an example of the system working. We can't kind of be knocked on our heels by this. There are countless hours and countless professionals that are working every day in the private and public sector to secure these events and these stadiums. And if they have a duty to warn and notify, then obviously we'll alter our plans. But otherwise, we're going to press on and live our lives.
When we have Ben Jolson and Tracy Walder looking out for us, I think we're in a good shape. Thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate you both.
Thanks, Jesse.
All right, break. 4 minutes, 30 seconds up next. This is a story Cuomo has been on since the beginning. Could David Knezevich, the man who's charged with the kidnapping of his estranged wife, missing Florida resident Anna Knezevich, get out of jail? Well, an FBI agent allegedly changed her story on key details in Anna's disappearance. What does the agent say now, and will it be enough to get David out from behind bars? We're going to talk about it. Stay with us. In a story that Chris has been following for a while, since the beginning. It's been about 6 months since 40-year-old Miami resident Anna Knezevich went missing while living in Madrid. Now, she was there. She was supposed to be clearing her head while going through a divorce, and Anna was last heard from February when she spoke to her friend at around the next day at around 2 of her friends were kind of hanging out. They got an odd text from Anna. And this is the part that was really bad, is that she was saying she had met someone wonderful and that she was going for a summer home for the weekend, and her friends knew right away something was wrong because that's not how Anna would talk. That's not how Anna would write. The texts were written, they say, by somebody that was not Anna. So then on Monday, this is February 5th, Anna didn't show up to meet a friend for a planned trip, and a missing persons report was filed. And 3 months after, Anna disappeared, and Anna's estranged husband, David, who had claimed to be in Serbia when she had gone missing, was arrested and charged with her kidnapping. Why? Well, a man resembling David was seen in Madrid purchasing a spray paint can on February 2nd, and later that night, a man seeming resembling David was seen spray painting Anna's security cameras in her building, and then seen leaving Anna's building with a suitcase. They also found texts that David allegedly sent to a woman asking her to translate a message into perfect Colombian. And guess what? It was the same exact text that Anna's friends had received over the weekend from Anna. But here is the thing. Today, David was back in court with attorneys, and they argued that testimony from an FBI agent saying that there was blood found in Anna's apartment where she was last seen, it wasn't true. There was no blood. And David should be let out on bail. Now, David's lawyers spoke briefly after court. Here's what they said.
It's obvious that the strength of the government's case is not what they represented it was. It's clear that the agent wasn't as forthcoming. And it's mostly clear that this investigation was not done in the manner and consistent with the ways that we would do things here in the United States. Number one, there isn't the evidence.
All right, so I want to bring in defense attorney Mark Garagos and Florida prosecutor Dave Arenberg. It's great to have you both here. Dave, I'll start with you. I think there is a strong possibility the judge is going to let him out. No detention. I mean, even before this hearing, the judge said it's kind of the evidence is too circumstantial. It's a close call. The judge seemed resistant today, felt that the evidence was not that strong.
Well, if the evidence provides enough probable cause to make an arrest, and the real question is he a flight risk? I would say that the guy who lives in Serbia, who has enough money to pay for these high-profile, high-powered attorneys, and by the way, I'm friends with Jane Weintraub, great lawyer, doesn't work cheap. I think he is a flight risk. And look, you can't ignore the circumstantial evidence here. I mean,
but the fact that the FBI agent said, there was blood there, we're relying on Spanish authorities, and say, we're wrong, there's no blood there. Even the judge, when they were showing a video of him allegedly coming out of the building with a suitcase, the judge almost squinted and said, is that a suitcase? And he's only was in the building for 9 minutes, so it seems to be skepticism on the part of the judge.
He was in the building for 9 minutes. He lives in Serbia. The building is in Madrid, right? Right. So, and he lied about being in Serbia. Then there's the text messages are pretty damning. Remember, this is not a murder prosecution yet. So the fact that there's no blood there, this is a case about a kidnapping. You don't have to have blood there to have a charge of kidnapping. Maybe if this was a murder case, the lack of blood is more important. But I think there's enough for probable cause, and because he's such a flight risk, I think they should keep him behind bars.
Let's talk about that in 1 second. I want to go to Mark. Mark, I want to play you something. So David's attorneys were asked this about the evidence that I mentioned, right? The idea that they have video of him allegedly buying spray paint at this store, this video of him, spray painting the cameras. Bad evidence. This is what the attorney had to say.
We don't know who that is. We don't know why that happened. But that's not the issue. What we do know is that the agent testified there was no struggle, there was no taking, and there's no evidence of any foul play in that apartment.
So is it possible that's not him? Yeah, I was going to say, is it possible that the person in the video is him?
I'm not. That's what the government plays. The government says, well, it's possible. You know what? We're in the United States of America. We don't put somebody in jail on a possibility.
I don't know, Mark. Is that a good lawyer answer, or is that avoiding what could be really bad evidence for a client?
Well, like David, I know Jane, and she's great. And by the way, this supposedly ironclad case, this judge was not convinced. I don't think anybody who didn't have a dog in this fight would have been convinced. It's clear to me, at least, that they don't have what they claim they had, and it actually was somewhat embarrassing for the prosecution today. And I think this judge is going to release him. By the way, I will agree with David to this extent that, yes, you're only looking at probable cause, but as my late father used to say, probable cause just means, is my client breathing?
Well, look, Mark, here's the thing. We're showing you some images, and I go back to that other piece of evidence, this idea that he had asked to translate, or allegedly asked to translate, the very text that was sent from Anna's phone. And you also think about who else would be responsible for a kidnapping when there's this kind of tumultuous relationship. It just feels tough for the defense at this point to argue maybe he won't be detained, but I don't think this is a case where there's not enough evidence to go forward with trial.
Oh, I beg to differ. I can think of at least 3 other alternatives for the translation of the text based on the timing.
Can you give me one? Can you give me an alternative? What's an alternative for that?
I'm not gonna do Jane's work for her. I'll just tell you that there clearly is one very other likely explanation for that translation, number one. Number two, as the judge indicated, even if this was the person and he had trouble saying that it was by looking at it, and all he had to do was observe it and make that identification himself, said he couldn't do it. He also completely undercut the timeline that in 9 minutes something happened. And by the way, as Dave also pointed out, our Dave, not that Dave, this is supposedly a kidnapping. The idea that somehow she was crammed into a briefcase or a suitcase or something else and carried out. This guy's got superhuman strength. Look, you can make up facts any way you want them, but here they tend to be like, who are you going to believe, your eyes or what actually was happening there?
Well, that's the point I want to end on, Dave. Why wasn't he charged with murder? Is it because they don't feel they have quite enough yet and maybe shows a weakness in their case? They charged him with kidnapping, and it makes me wonder, how would he have transported her out of the apartment? So why not charge him with murder yet?
They're working on it. And one of the reasons why they charged him with kidnapping was to keep him behind bars while they continue to investigate the murder case. They don't have enough evidence, or else they would have charged him. And you don't want to charge too soon. Because as Mark says, although you need probable cause for prosecutors, we need to have enough evidence to get a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. You have no body here, and now it looks like you have no blood, so you don't have a murder case yet.
A lot of interesting developments in this case. Dave Arenberg, Mark Garagos, thank you both so much. Really appreciate it. Now, this break is 3 minutes, 45 seconds. And up next, 2 American astronauts were supposed to be in space for 8 days, and now they may be stuck up there until 2025. The question is, what went wrong? How are we going to get them back? That's next. You want to hear something really scary? 2 American astronauts are literally stuck in space. Yeah, what was supposed to be an 8-day test mission could now leave these astronauts stranded for 8 months or more. And they may not be able to even come home until 2025. So NASA's in a bind here. Either A, bring them home in Boeing's troubled Starliner, which is thruster issues, leaks, or keep pushing the date, maybe wait for another space crew to pick them up in 7 months. So what's the right move? Well, here to give us some insight is someone who has been there before, former NASA astronaut Mike Massimino, good to see you. All right, what is the better option? Use the Starliner, which is, I don't know, kind of iffy maybe, or you wait for somebody to pick them up?
Well, Jesse, they're not going to use the Starliner unless it's 100% cleared to come back. It did have some thruster issues and leaks, as you said. Most of those have been cleaned up, but they still don't understand the problem as well as they'd like. And that's why they're still holding back before they clear that vehicle to come back with the astronauts on board. So what everyone would prefer is that the vehicle is 100% ready to go to come back, put the astronauts inside of there, and bring them back. Now, if that's not an option because they don't feel comfortable with that, they will bring that spaceship back empty. But in order to get the astronauts back, they're going to launch another spaceship half full, a SpaceX vehicle with 2 astronauts, 2 open seats, bring that one up there in September. The 2 crew up there now will remain on board and keep working, and will come back probably sometime in February. So those are the 2 options. Come back on Starliner or send another spaceship and bring them back the next year.
You know what I have to ask you? Do they have enough supplies to maybe be stuck up there?
Yeah, they do, actually. In fact, they have supply ships that go there pretty regularly. So they have plenty of food, clothes, whatever you need, oxygen, life support is all there. So that's not an issue. They have plenty of stuff to keep them going for a long time.
Let me ask you, I am clearly no astronaut expert, despite the many rumors out there. I did watch Armageddon. I'm pretty sure that's accurate. But other than that, is this common? Why do I say that? I say that because Boeing has had a stain on itself for a while. I have to imagine this doesn't look good for them. Is this a real big problem for Boeing?
This isn't good. I mean, if they can figure out the problems and especially put the crew inside and come back, that's great. If not, they're going to get the spacecraft back without the crew, but at least they can study the spacecraft and hopefully learn more with the keeping it on orbit for a little bit longer and studying the problem on the ground. But as far as it's happening before, we did have a situation a little over a year ago of a guy named Frank Rubio. An American astronaut was up with 2 cosmonauts on a Soyuz. That Soyuz had a coolant leak and was not cleared to return. So they sent up an empty Soyuz, and they returned the one that had the leak empty without any people. And then Frank and his crew came back on the new Soyuz. But they had to extend that mission by 6 months. So Frank set a record, an American record of 370 days in space. So he thought he was going up for 6 months, and he ended up staying up for a year. I think the difference here is, that was a Soyuz spacecraft that they have been flying that spacecraft for decades. This is the first time they've gotten people inside. It's a test flight for the Boeing vehicle. And you expect with a test flight, there's going to be some kinks.
Yeah.
But this is a little unusual.
Just want to go real quick before I let you go, 30 seconds. Yeah. How do we know the communication's accurate? They're up there. They have to be sure that the Starliner's right. How do we know that the people they're communicating with, how do they know that communication's accurate, that this Starliner's good to go?
Well, they haven't cleared it yet. And I know the folks in charge, Steve Stitch is a longtime flight director and manager at NASA. They're not messing around with this. They're not going to put the crew at risk.
All right.
So I think with 100% certainty, the communication is good between the ground and the crew.
If you are 100% certain that this will be resolved, I am 100% certain that this will be resolved. Mike Massimino, thank you so much.
I just don't know how, but it will be resolved.
The hell we'll figure out. But there.
I'm with you.
Thanks so much.
All
Good
right.
seeing you. We'll be right back.
Yeah.
Astronauts, Secret Service, police, the brave men and women of this country that do the jobs we just cannot do. Hats off to them. That's all we have for tonight here on Cuomo. I'm Jesse Weber. It's been great. Thank you so much.